The fire beneath the veil. In the shadow of a frostbitten city, where the spires of ancient cathedrals pierced the sky like accusations, a woman named Mira knelt in a crumbling attic, her breath visible in the dim light of a single candle. The year was 2032, and the world outside her window was a kaleidoscope of fear and control, where truth was a fragile thing, easily shattered by those who wielded power. The city, once called St. Petersburg, now bore a new name, Novigrad, bestowed by a regime that sought to rewrite history itself. Myra's hands trembled as she unfolded a tattered piece of paper, its edges singed as if it had narrowly escaped a fire. On it, in her own hurried script, were words that could end her life: "The veil is a lie." The ban. The news had come like a thunderclap, reverberating through the city's concrete veins. The International Satanism Movement, a loosely organized collective of artists, philosophers, and dissenters, had been declared an extremist organization by the state. Their symbol, a stylized flame cradled in an open hand, was now forbidden, their writings confiscated, their members hunted. The state claimed they were a threat to moral order, a cabal of chaos worshippers bent on unraveling society. But Mira knew better. She had been one of them, not because she believed in their provocative name, but because they dared to ask questions no one else would. The movement had never been about Satan, not in the way the state portrayed. It was a rebellion against dogma, a refusal to bow to any authority that demanded blind faith, whether in a god, a government, or an algorithm. They painted murals in abandoned factories, wrote manifestos in code, and held secret gatherings where they debated the nature of truth. To Mira, they were a beacon of freedom in a world suffocating under control. But now, that beacon was being snuffed out. She had heard the announcement on the state's omnipresent screens, the ones that flickered in every public square, every train station, every home. The Minister of Cultural Purity, a gaunt man with eyes like polished steel, had declared the movement's teachings a poison to the soul of our nation. Mira had watched, her heart pounding, as neighbors nodded in approval, their faces blank with fear disguised as righteousness. She knew what would come next: the raids, the interrogations, the disappearances. She had seen it before, when the state banned the Free Poets Guild, then the Quantum Faith Collective. Each time, the excuse was the same: protecting the people from dangerous ideas. Myra's attic was her sanctuary, a place where she could still think, still breathe. The walls were lined with books she had salvaged from purges, philosophy, poetry, forbidden histories. In the corner, a small radio crackled with static, tuned to a pirate frequency the movement used to broadcast their messages. Tonight, it was silent. The last broadcast had been 3 days ago, a cryptic poem about a fire that could not be extinguished. Mira clung to those words, repeating them in her mind as she stared at the paper in her hands. She wasn't alone in the attic. Across from her sat Lev, a wiry man with a scar running from his temple to his jaw, a relic of a protest gone wrong. He was one of the movement's couriers, delivering messages and supplies to members in hiding. His eyes, usually sharp with defiance, were clouded with worry. "They're closing in," he said, his voice low. "They found the safe house in Viborg. Anya and Dmitri are gone." Myra's stomach twisted. Anya had been her friend since childhood, a painter whose murals could make you weep with their beauty. Dmitri was her brother, a coder who wove dissent into algorithms. Gone as in? Lev shook his head. Not dead. Not yet. Taken. Mira closed her eyes, fighting the wave of despair. The state's prisons were black holes, people vanished into them, their names erased, their stories rewritten. She unfolded the paper again, tracing the words with her finger. The veil is a lie. It was the movement's core belief, a metaphor for the illusions that propped up the regime, the illusion of safety, of unity, of truth. To tear down the veil was to expose the raw, messy reality beneath, a reality the state feared more than any demon. "We have to keep going," Mira said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "The broadcast. The plan. We can't stop now." Lev leaned forward, his scarred face catching the candlelight. "Mira, they're watching everything. The drones, the cameras, the informants. If we try to send another signal, they'll trace it. They'll find us. Then we make it worth it," she replied. "One last message. Something they can't ignore." Lev studied her, his expression torn between admiration and dread. "You're insane. You know that, right?" Mira managed a faint smile. "Maybe. But insanity is the only thing keeping me free. The flame." Mira hadn't always been a rebel. 10 years ago, she was a librarian, cataloging books in a state-run archive, her days filled with the quiet rustle of pages and the hum of climate-controlled vaults. She believed in order, in the system, in the idea that knowledge could be preserved without being weaponized. But then the purges began. Books were burned, not for their content, but for their potential to inspire doubt. Mira watched as entire shelves were reduced to ash, her protests met with warnings: conform, or become ash yourself. It was Anya who introduced her to the movement. They met in a cafe, one of the few places where people still whispered dissent over weak coffee. Anya slid a pamphlet across the table, its cover a simple flame. "Read it," she said. "It's not what you think." The pamphlet was a manifesto, not of chaos, but of clarity. It argued that truth was not a gift from above, but a fire kindled within, a fire that required constant tending. Mira read it in one sitting, her heart racing with a mix of fear and exhilaration. For the first time, she felt awake. Now, in the attic, that fire burned brighter than ever. The plan was audacious, even by the movement's standards. They would hijack the state's own broadcast network, a labyrinth of satellites and servers that blanketed Novigrad with propaganda. Instead of the minister's droning speeches, the city would hear the movement's message, a call to question, to resist, to reclaim the truth. The signal would be untraceable, thanks to Dmitri's code, a masterpiece of digital defiance. But it required a physical uplink, a transmitter hidden in the city's industrial district, a place crawling with state enforcers. Lev unfolded a map, its edges frayed from use. "The transmitter's here," he said, pointing to a cluster of abandoned factories. "We'll need to get past the drones and the checkpoints. And we'll need a diversion." Mira nodded, her mind racing. The diversion would be her responsibility. She had an idea, one that made her stomach churn with both fear and resolve. She would stage a public act of defiance, something to draw the enforcers away from the industrial district. It would mean exposing herself, risking capture, but it was the only way to give Lev and the others a chance. "What are you planning?" Lev asked, sensing the shift in her expression. Mira hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a can of spray paint. The flame symbol was etched on its side. "I'm going to paint the truth," she said. "Right where they can't ignore it." The act. The next night, Mira stood in the heart of Novigrad Central Square, her hood pulled low, the spray can cold in her hand. The square was a monument to control, a towering statue of the state's founder, his face stern and unyielding, surrounded by screens that never slept. At this hour, the square was nearly empty, save for the drones humming overhead, their red eyes scanning for dissent. Myra's heart pounded as she approached the statue. The plan was simple but suicidal. She would paint the movement's flame on the statue's base, large enough to be seen from every corner of the square. The act would trigger the alarms, drawing the enforcers to her location while Lev and the others slipped into the industrial district. She knew the consequences: capture, interrogation, erasure, but the fire within her burned too fiercely to be quenched by fear. She shook the can, the rattle echoing in the silence. Then, with steady hands, she began to paint. The flame took shape quickly, its curves bold and defiant against the gray stone. She worked fast, her breath shallow, aware of the drones circling closer. When the symbol was complete, she stepped back, her chest tight with a strange mix of terror and triumph. The alarms blared almost instantly, a piercing wail that shattered the night. Red lights flashed across the square, and the screens flickered, displaying her image in real time, a hooded figure, paint can in hand, standing before the flame. Mira didn't run. She wanted them to see her, to know that someone still dared to fight. The enforcers arrived in minutes, their boots pounding the pavement, their rifles glinting under the streetlights. Mira dropped the can and raised her hands, her eyes fixed on the flame. "The veil is a lie," she shouted, her voice carrying over the alarms. "You can't extinguish the truth." They seized her roughly, their gloved hands bruising her arms. As they dragged her away, she caught a glimpse of the screens, now broadcasting her words to the city. For a moment, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, someone out there was listening. The broadcast. In the industrial district, Lev and a small team of movement members crept through the shadows of a derelict factory. The transmitter was hidden in a basement, a tangle of wires and screens that hummed with latent power. Dimitri's code was their key, a sequence that would override the state's network and broadcast their message to every screen in Novigrad. Lev's hands shook as he connected the device, his mind racing with thoughts of Mira. Her diversion had worked, the enforcers were swarming the central square, leaving the district eerily quiet. But he knew the cost. Mira was gone, at least for now, and the weight of her sacrifice pressed heavily on him. The code uploaded slowly, each second an eternity. When the screen flickered to life, Lev typed the final command, and the broadcast began. Across Novigrad, the state's propaganda dissolved, replaced by a single image, the flame, burning brightly against a black background. A voice, Mira's, recorded days earlier, filled the airwaves. "We are not your enemies," she said, her voice steady and clear. "We are your questions, your doubts, your fire. The veil is a lie, woven to keep you blind. Tear it down. See the truth. Be free." The message looped, unstoppable, as the city stirred. In apartments and cafes, in hidden basements and crowded trains, people watched, their faces a mix of fear and wonder. Some turned away, afraid of what it meant to listen. Others leaned closer, their hearts kindled by a spark they hadn't felt in years. The reckoning. Mira sat in a cell, her wrists bound, her body bruised but unbroken. The interrogator sat across from her, a woman with a face like carved ice. "You think your little stunt changed anything?" she asked, her voice dripping with contempt. "The people don't want your chaos. They want order." Mira met her gaze, unflinching. "They want truth," she said. "And you can't imprison that." The interrogator laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "Truth? Truth is what we say it is. Your movement is finished. Your friends are dead or captured. Your fire is out." But Mira smiled, a quiet, defiant smile. She had seen the screens before they dragged her away, had heard her own voice echoing through the city. The fire wasn't out. It was spreading, carried by those who had heard, who had seen, who had dared to believe. The spark. Weeks later, the state declared victory. The movement was dismantled, its leaders imprisoned or exiled. The flame symbol was erased from the statue, the broadcast silenced. But in the shadows, something stirred. A child scrawled a flame on a school desk. A worker whispered Mira's words to a friend. A coder embedded a message in a state algorithm, a single line: "The veil is a lie." Mira's fate was unknown. Some said she was dead, others that she was in a secret prison, her spirit unbroken. But her story lived on, a spark that refused to die. In a world of fear and control, she had shown that freedom was not a gift, but a fire, one that could burn through any veil, no matter how thick. And somewhere, in another attic, another rebel unfolded a piece of paper, its edges singed, and began to write.